Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. I hope that you all are having a great day, and I hope that you guys are have had a wonderful weekend. I hope that you guys enjoyed your Monday. I hope for those in the United States, I hope you had a wonderful day off because it was Memorial Day. If you got the day off, and I hope that you all have your friends and family and yourselves are all nice and safe currently. And if not, I hope you find that safety and security very soon. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. For whatever reason, the days we take off, the most stuff happens, and I don't know why. I think it's just the bad luck. But we need to take a day off all the time because we're humans and not robots, so we can't. We're a small team, and I work a full-time job, so I'm sorry that we do take those days off, but it is necessary to maintain at least my sanity. And so, of course, we'll be streaming for the rest of the week until next Monday. But there's obviously a lot of stuff going on in the world. We have the war ongoing in Ukraine. We have currently famines and droughts currently going on in Iraq, Ethiopia, Somalia, really just the Horn of Africa in general. We have recovery efforts in Southeast Asia because of Super Typhoon Rai. There are currently recovery efforts in Durban, South Africa, from torrential floods, which actually killed over 400 people earlier this year. And then also recovery efforts in Brazil, which we unfortunately do not have a follow-up today on. There was no more information regarding that. There were still 56 people unaccounted for, along with 56 dead because of torrential rains and landslides in Brazil. So please, there are millions of people currently in the world that need help, not just because of the war in Ukraine, but because of so many issues. And so we want to be able to help these people, and we can only do that with your support. We want to be the news that can give back. One, to give you independent news from independent sources, but also we want to be able to help people worldwide. And that's really a community effort. So if you check out in the description below, you're going to see that we went through and we vetted a ton of organizations, and we're always looking for more. So please join us on our Discord, which is also in the description, and let a staff member know so we can get more stuff vetted. All of those are our official organizations. We went through, like I said, and vetted to make sure that they were. And also, all of those organizations, 80% or more of any donations they receive actually go to their programs. And they are not just for Ukraine, but also other places in the world. So you can donate to whichever you're currently feeling like at this time, if you can. And we can help people globally, not just... This is not going to be just a Ukraine channel. We're not trying to ride the war as they become popular. We want to actually report the news here. So there's a lot of other stuff going on, and we want to be able to help. So if you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, then give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends know about us. The more people that come here, the more people that can help and donate and assist with what's going on, and also get more independent news. So with that, there's a ton of stuff currently ongoing, and we're actually going to dive right into the special report, which is regarding the country of Ukraine and the ongoing war in the region. So currently, we have a couple of different stories. A lot of this is going to be coming out of the Donbass, of course, where the heaviest fighting is currently ongoing, specifically in the areas right there in the Luhansk, where there seems to be a large concentration of troops. But we have a couple of uplifting stories to start with, and that's because Rivne, which is up in the northwestern part of Ukraine, actually received at least 6 ambulances from medical institutions. And specifically, the quote is, charitable organizations from Italy and Germany have donated 6 ambulances to medical institutions in Rivne. And this is coming from Vitaly Koval, who is the head of the Rivne Regional Military Administration. So very good to see that. We still see a ton of humanitarian aid coming into the country. A lot of that is stuff that you guys have been able to do, whether that was while you're doing it with us or with other communities as well. But people everywhere have really been pouring a lot of humanitarian efforts into this, and it is currently, the effects show. There we have the World Central Kitchen operating in the region, which we saw up in Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin, and Kyiv. We have, how many ambulances and fire trucks and how many tons and tons and tons of food and medical supplies have been poured into this country. All of that stuff is independently funded. and all that's, and there's a ton of organizations currently helping, not just in Ukraine, but on those border regions as well, such as in Poland and Romania. So we're starting to see the effects of what we've been doing, and hopefully that continues to help improve people's lives. As we push a little bit further to the east here, we actually take a stop in Kyiv, and that's because we can see Patron. Patron is this little bomb-sniffing dog. He's absolutely adorable. He has a vest. You can carry him like a suitcase. But what he does is he actually sniffs out unexploded ordnance. So landmines, bombs, shells, bullets, you name it. He sniffs it out, and they can take those. These groups are explosive ordnance disposal teams, or EOD teams. A lot of other countries call them demining teams. But what they do is they go through and they actually take this ordnance. They either render it inoperable on site, or they actually remove it and then control detonate a lot of it off site at a safe location. That way it isn't a hazard to the public. In the ongoing war, the amount of ordnance fired by both sides, keep in mind a lot of this happened during the middle of the Rasputitsa, which is the very thick mud in Ukraine. And things like that love to absorb shells, and they do not like to explode when they hit really soft things. A lot of this stuff is direct impact, so you need to crush the end of it for it to detonate. That isn't the case when really thick mud that's bogging down tanks and literally sucking people into it. And that is kind of the issue with areas such as Sumy, Chernihiv, Kyiv, this whole northern region originally, where there's just a ton of ordnance stuck in the ground. We've seen landmines everywhere. There are anti-tank mines everywhere. There are booby traps that have been left. There are all sorts of things that are hazardous to the public. I mean, we've seen farmers already getting killed because they are hitting landmines or unexploded ordnance when they're trying to plow their fields. So this is a significant danger, but that is what Patron does. He sniffs this kind of stuff out, and he's going to become a little bit of an internet celebrity. And during a meeting with international teams here, we can see that Patron was part of that meeting. So there he is. He has his own seat. This little adorable dog, I can't get enough of him. I mean, I live to see this dog. He's absolutely adorable, but he's been awarded medals. He's getting a stamp. He's just, but yeah, he's got his own seat at the table. He's just one of the crew, and he has found somewhere between 200 and 300 pieces of unexploded ordnance thus far, which is a really insane number. And those EOD teams, they're a very small community. There's not a lot of them. It's a very dangerous and it's a very demanding job. And their dogs and the teams are getting worked round the clock, nonstop, and it's extremely tiring. This kind of a cleanup can take decades to complete. You're talking, if you want examples, you can take a look at places such as Vietnam, where there are still hazards because of unexploded ordnance. France, where, let alone World War II, but also World War I, parts of Verdun, Flanders, the Somme, you cannot go into some of these locations because there is so much unexploded ordnance from just World War I that it is too dangerous for civilians to enter, and it's even too dangerous and too unstable for even explosive ordnance disposal teams to actually go in there and detonate some of this stuff. So we're going to see the repercussions of the war for a very, very long time. And that actually brings us into the actual conflict. And what we're going to be seeing and talking about is mainly the areas around Luhansk and Donetsk right here within this border area. So Russia maintains control of roughly about 95% of the Luhansk region. Right now, their main focus is specifically on the city of Severodonetsk. The Severodonetsk was partially encircled. However, Russian forces have been unable to complete the encirclement movement and have been unable to trap Ukrainian forces. As a result, the Ukrainian forces have been fighting back, but their main defensive lines were outside of the city, where they were holding and maintaining relatively static defensive lines since roughly 2014. Since those lines have been broken through, while Ukrainian morale remains high, Russian forces have pushed deeper into Severodonetsk. And we have seen rather extensive fighting. We know that there is rather extensive fighting. A lot of the images coming out of the fighting are unfortunately too graphic for me to be putting on here. Lots of dead, unfortunately, but that is just the nature of war. It's not a very pretty endeavor. And we also saw today where Russian forces actually ended up hitting yet another nitric acid tank. Now, before, I've also said this was citric acid. I apologize for that in the previous stream. That was pointed out to me in a comment. I was being dumb. But we've seen them hit up actually over by Rubizne. We see one hit here in Severodonetsk, and that is actually toxic. We've seen it go over Russian lines before, and Russian commanders were complaining, and separatist commanders were complaining about their troops becoming sick because of these noxious gases. Because of these threats, and as well as conventional chemical weapon threats, I say conventional, but actual chemical weapons threats such as nerve agents, Ukraine has been supplied and has been supplying their troops with a lot more gas masks, and we've also seen the Russian side boost the amount of troops that have them. However, they are running into logistical issues just maintaining their battalion tactical groups, let alone outfitting them with additional equipment. So, but this thing is rising thousands of feet into the air. And this is pretty much where we have pointed out that these Russian forces have pushed forward into the city. And we've seen all sorts of maps, but that's actually the nitric acid tank. You can tell it's nitric acid just based off of the color of the fumes coming out of this thing. And that's one of the main chemicals being produced at these plants. So this thing rose hundreds of feet into the air, and depending on the wind shift, that's actually going to be coming in and over to the city, and it's going to be extremely dangerous for anyone to be covered or for anyone to inhale. And take a look at this video here regarding it.
Це йобнуло, Що це таке, їбать?
Я тебе говорю, что-то, блядь, на селитру похоже.
Що?
Что-то на селитру похоже, блядь.
А що це за хуйня?
Охуенная хуйня.
Хімія якась, типа, да?
Дыхать не советуется.
Може траванути якось жорстко, да?
Может, блядь. Я что за протики говорю, что, блядь.
Я їбу.
Давай, с вами? Да. Один. Сорвался мяк, походу.
Работают по аммиаку, ебать. Андрюха, противогазы возьми. Тут противогазы есть. Вон. Ящик приоткрытый.
Що ти взяв?
Говорят, здание обвалилось нахуй. Они, походу, аммиак снова пизданули, долбоёбы.
Мы не знаем.
And unfortunately, because of what's been going on, Severodonetsk is a city, and it's a heavily civilian populace, and that a lot of people, where else are you going to go? It's a very difficult decision, but while they're just sitting here talking to women, there was a strike. They apparently these women did survive, but we can take a look at this.
Знаем, кто тут были. Мы в основном тут. Кто, шо. В нашем доме не было никого. Только мы, мирные жители.
So you have to understand that what's happening in Severodonetsk, this is a heavily populated city. It's a very large city. You have a massive concentration of troops, and you have a massive concentration of artillery firing ahead of these troops. Really, how the Russian doctrine works is broken down into three different ways, and there's three prongs of attack based on the Russian doctrine over the last roughly 70 years. And the first thing that they do is they saturate, bombard an area, whether that's using heavy amounts of artillery or that's using air assets. And what that does is it's supposed to soften up any resistance that they're going to encounter. The second thing that you do is, or that the Russians will do, is they use an armored force, an armored spearhead. So that's why you're seeing lots of mechanized forces, whether that's the using of BTRs, BMDs, BMPs, or just their tanks, T-72s, T-80s, T-90s, or at this point T-64s and T-62s we also know are employed on the Russian side. And those are going to try and drive a spearhead, an armored spearhead, and break through those lines and break morale. This is extremely useful if you're talking about open maneuver warfare. The third tactic in the third line that comes through is actually going to be the infantry. So tanks, as you have seen throughout the duration of this war, based on Russian doctrine, operate relatively unsupported of any infantry assistance. And this is what has left them very vulnerable and has caused such a high loss in Russian armored forces. They really operate independently, whereas in Western countries, there's kind of a reversal ideology. You would think you want to put the big metal things up front, but the big metal things are really big targets. So you put the really squishy guys up front, and then the tanks support the infantry, not the infantry support the tank. So that's kind of how doctrinally the two sides are different. And we're seeing that Russian doctrine has a lot of failures to it when it's not operating in really advantageous terrain. That tactic really is for operating on the Russian steppe, which is great for where Russia is if you're defending Russia, not great if you're attacking an enemy that does not have necessarily similar terrain to Russia. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. In the town of Rubizhne, we are officially going to be declaring up into the Severodonetsk River as controlled by Russia. This is probably a little bit long overdue, but Rubizhne, we hadn't got a lot of information since the initial fighting over Rubizhne. And while it's been reported, we just don't have enough independent information until really now to be able to say it is firmly in Russian hands. Now, that does make sense when you're talking about the context of the encirclement around Severodonetsk, but Rubizhne is much like Mariupol in the fact that there's not really a city there anymore. Rubizhne has essentially been wiped off the face of the earth. And we're actually going to take a look at some of the drone footage that has recently come out regarding the city of Rubizhne. So let's take a look. So there's no audio to this, but you can just see the amount of destruction. And it's not just these houses or this neighborhood, as we're getting ready to take a look at. The drone footage that has come out of this war is it's 10 times greater than probably any other war that's occurred in this short amount of time. It's really given us a brand new perspective on the scale of modern warfare and its absolute destruction. Looks like they're getting ready to carry away a casualty here. And we can tell by the white armbands, these are separatist forces. So these are Russian-backed separatist forces. That probably is the LPR or the LNR, depending on if you consider the Luhansk People's Republic to be an official state. It is unrecognized according to the UN. You can see just the whole city, as they're panning, is just leveled. Look at this zoom out. This is what saturation bombardment looks like on a massive scale. This is also a war crime. This is very much a war crime. And I'm getting ready to get into that here in a second. I actually have pulled up some of the past information we've shared here, and what it was really a toss up as to what I really wanted to put as today's real story headliner, whether that was SEVERODONETSK, which we're all following, or if it was just war crimes, and that's because everything that we have covered individually over the last few episodes where we talk about war crimes throughout the duration of this war, all of it plus some surfaced today. So I actually went back through the Geneva Conventions and the customary international humanitarian law, and actually found the articles and rules regarding that to actually bring forth for you so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So, but you can see the amount of destruction is immense, and that really is because of things like the BM-21 Grad system, which fires for the most part 120 millimeter Katyusha rockets, and it's not an accurate weapon. It's meant to fill an area with as much explosive ordnance as possible. It's not precision. It's just, I want everything over there blown up, and that's its job. And what this violates specifically is 4 different articles of the Geneva Convention. So all of this is from the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is from the 12th of August, 1949. That Geneva Convention was immediately a result of the Hague, the trials of the Hague following the fall of Nazi Germany, and the prosecution for the newly coined term of genocide. So the specific point of the 1949 convention is the prevention of genocide against the civilian population, as well as covering other things that came up as a result of World War II in order to prevent similar atrocities and tragedies from happening. And what this is specifically is Title 4 of Section 1, Chapter 2, and Article 51. And that is the protection in the civilian population. And there's several parts to this. And really what this is civilians shall enjoy the protection afforded by this section unless and for such time as they take a direct part in hostilities. Meaning, if you are to join the Territorial Defense Forces, you are now a combatant. Okay? And it's broken down into several sections. Those which are not directed at a specific military objective. So that includes number 4. Indiscriminate attacks are prohibited. Indiscriminate attacks are those which are not directed at a specific military objective, aka saturation bombardment of a civilian concentration. Those which employ a method or means of combat which cannot be directed at a specific military objective. Once again, unguided munitions, mass unguided munitions, and a high concentration of civilian populace. Those which employ a method or means of combat effects which cannot be limited as required by this protocol, and consequently in each such case are of a nature to strike military objectives and civilians or civilian objects without distinction. Once again, mass bombardment. And this is specifically all in relation to the protecting of victims of international armed conflicts, which is all under Protocol 1. So Protocol 1 was adopted on the 8th of June, 1977, and there are 3 protocols that were adopted in addition to the 1949 Convention and ratified by the signees of the Geneva Convention. We can further this up as we go further along with Article 52. Article 52, civilians shall not be the object of attack or of a reprisal. Civilian objects are all objects which are not military objectives as defined in paragraph 2. Attacks shall be limited strictly to military objectives insofar as objects are concerned. Military objectives are limited to those objects which by their nature, location, purpose, or use make them effective contribution to military action, or whose total or partial destruction, capture, or neutralization in the circumstances ruling at the time, offers a definite military advantage. In a case of doubt whether an object, which is normally dedicated to civilian purposes, such as the place of worship, a house or other dwelling, or a school, is being used to make an effective contribution to military action, it should be presumed not to be so. So, if there's any question whatsoever that any of these locations are being used, or whether or not any of these locations, a house, a place of worship, a school, a hospital, any of that is being used for a military purpose, then unless you take direct contact from that location and you can positively identify your target within that location, you cannot open fire on these locations, because that would be indiscriminate attacks against the civilian populace or civilian objects. So I just got someone who said that that the United States is not a signatory to the Hague, and this is regarding to the American Service Members Protections Act, or ASPA. So that is actually not true. So the United States is a signatory of the Geneva Conventions, all of them, all four of them. Whether they were later signees and ratifiers, or whether or not they had things such as, because you can ratify the Geneva Convention with discrepancies. So that is a possibility, and there's a separate signatory part of the Geneva Convention as a result of that. Now, I'll actually show that to you later when I bring up the actual Geneva Convention article. But the thing about this is every single U.S. service member is actually protected under the Geneva Convention because they are a signatory. Protections under the Geneva Convention are done because you're a signatory of that convention, and therefore you are required to adhere to the customary international humanitarian law, or the IHL, and also the Geneva Convention. Specifically for U.S. service members of at least the enlisted rank, you have Geneva Convention protections level 1, which means that you are adherent to all of the basic standards of the Geneva Convention, while other ranks such as officers have separate clarifications under the Geneva Convention, and that is all listed actually on your military identification card on the back. So yes, they are. Yes, the United States is signatories. There are things the United States did not sign, and that includes such as the Ontario Mine Treaty. While the United States does adhere to many of its principles, the United States is not an actual signatory of the anti-personnel or mine treaty, basically. And so therefore the United States can still use anti-personnel mines, not being a signatory, and does not see that as an issue. However, they do limit the scope. You're actually not permitted in the United States military, for instance, to have a self-triggered anti-personnel mine. You have to trigger it as yourself, meaning you need to be able to positively identify your target visually. So that is actually a thing. The only thing that can be self-triggered are things such as pop flares, which you're allowed to set on a tripwire. So I hope that explains that. I'm sorry. I don't have the ASPA prepared. If I will take a look at the ASPA again so I can further read into that a little bit more. But I did serve in the United States Marine Corps, so I have a little bit of I do understand what I'm protected by. Going a little bit further, we can actually, once again, getting back to Rubus name, we can take a look at Article 57 of Protocol 1, and that is the precautions of the attack. What this article dictates is whether or not, or the precautions that a military commander and a military unit must partake in prior to conducting an attack, and their considerations. And this is in order to prevent all types of precautions to prevent and minimize collateral damage and loss of civilian life. So, for instance, we can take a look at Part 2, Section A2, and this is take all feasible precautions in the choice of means and methods of attack with a view to avoiding, in any event, to minimizing incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. And finally, we can take a look at Article 58, precautions against the effects of attack. All parties in the conflict shall, to the maximum extent feasible, without prejudice to Article 59 of the Force Convention, endeavor to remove the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under their control from the vicinity of military objectives, avoid locating military objectives within or near densely populated military areas, and take other necessary precautions to protect the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under the control against the dangers resulting from military operations. This means that you cannot place your military forces in a highly dense military or in a highly dense area of civilian populace unless it has a military objective to it. And that is where the caveat for Article 49 comes in. And also, it means that you have to take all precautions to prevent and protect civilians and prevent the collateral damage and loss of civilian life as a result of the dangers of military operations. Once again, if we take a look at Rubizne, let's see if we get that zoom out here. There we go. Yeah, none of that happened. This is not taking precautions. The means and the methods, therefore, you cannot bombard a civilian population, a high concentration civilian population, similar to what's going on in SEVERODONETSK and also what happened in Mariupol, as was such highly reported by both sides during the duration of this war. So that is why this is a war crime. The attacking of a town and the resulting collateral damage, there is an extent of collateral damage which is just unfortunately unpreventable. War is going to have collateral. There will be civilian casualties. It does not matter how hard you try. It does not matter, how hard you try. Houses are going to get destroyed. People's lives are going to be changed for the worse for the rest of their lives. But doing this on such a mass scale is considered systematic in its approach. And it's once again, the Fourth Geneva Convention and the following protocols thereof, the three protocols specifically, are on prevention of genocide, which is why the International Criminal Court is conducting ongoing investigations against genocide in Ukraine. So once again, someone just commented and stated that the Ukraine is fighting in those houses. Okay, once again, the means and the methods. That is the caveat. The means and the methods. The U.S. could have wiped Fallujah off the face of the earth. The U.S. could have wiped Baghdad off of the face of the earth. It could have happened. It wouldn't have been hard. The city of Fallujah and all of the thousands of people in it could have been turned into dust almost instantaneously from the massive amount of artillery and air power that the United States has. But we didn't. We went through and we cleared every single house. That is why there are things like the Hell House. Please go look it up. Sergeant Major Castle is a real G. So that is the ongoing situation. So that is currently the ongoing situation with Ukraine. I mean, yes, are there troops fighting in and out of houses? It's urban warfare. That's military's trained to fight in houses. It's for any defender, fighting in a house is magnificent. It's the terrain you want. But as an attacker and a signatory of the Geneva Convention, you have a responsibility to limit collateral damage, and we just don't see that at all. We're actually going to move on from that. We're actually going to drop down here to Popasna, where we have yet more evidence of looting. This has actually turned into a meme, as some people have zoomed in on this guy's face. I'm not going to bring up the meme here, but just look at his tank. I mean, look at all the looted stuff on his tank. I mean, that's just... This is a T-80, by the way. You can tell because I has like this little mustache up front. But this is a T-80, This tanker is just loaded with all sorts of, like, he's got like a little Disney blanket. Like, you think he brought that from home? No, he didn't. Don't lie to me. Now, once again, this is actually a new one that I have not covered, and that's actually pillaging. And we saw this highly in the top of, up near Kiev. And this actually breaks two different things. It breaks rule number 52 of Volume 2, Chapter 16, Section D of the Customary International Humanitarian Law, which is that Rule 52, pillage is prohibited, meaning you cannot loot people. Like, you can't loot people. It's just not allowed. Like, it doesn't, like, the medieval ages are over, okay? You can't loot people anymore. Be a disciplined army. If you can't do that, don't be an army. Okay? It also breaks the Fourth Geneva Convention, Part 3, Section 1, Article 33, page 180. This is the Fourth Geneva Convention. This is the actual PDF file. This is coming directly from the United Nations. This is the actual Geneva Convention from the 12th of August, 1949. And if we go to page 180. Sorry about that, folks. I keep forgetting I have everything hotkeyed here. Looks like I'm going to have to do this by hand. Sorry about that. I have everything hotkeyed on my number pad, so every time I use my number pad at work all day long for typing in numbers, and then I come here and I forget everything's hotkeyed for the stream. But we're gonna go over here to page 180. Oh, right here. Article 33, individual responsibility, collective penalties, pillage, and reprisals. Article 33 of the Geneva Convention, 12th of August, 1949. Article 33, no protected person, which meaning a civilian, may be punished for an offense he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited. Pillage is prohibited. Reprisals against protected persons and their property are prohibited. Article 34 continues, the taking of hostages is prohibited. This means, under Article 33, pillage is prohibited. Once again, this breaks the Geneva Convention, which makes it a war crime. Okay. All right, Guillermo Elenis. You have made several comments here that are very interesting to say the least regarding this. They did destroy Fallujah in the second operation in response to what I was saying. The shock and awe was directed at civilians, TV stations, water pumping stations, electric pylons, etc. Panama City was devastated by the U.S. Navy and U.S. planes attacking the barrios. You know about Panama. I do know about the operation of Panama. The U.S. is looting Syrian oil. Trump said so. First of all, alrighty. So we're going to go ahead and go into this. First of all, I spent 4.5 months in Syria, including at the Conoco oil fields, and I can tell you no one's looting Syrian oil because those oil fields are so bombed beyond repair that it will take decades and millions of dollars to even get them up and running. And also, most of them were owned by ISIS, and we went and we killed them all. Secondly, okay, we did not completely destroy Fallujah. Was it severely damaged in the fighting? Yes, and and as you saw during the actual Battle of Fallujah, it was rather brutal fighting. In fact, when I say the United States took heavy casualties, it's an understatement. The Marine Corps specifically took roughly 82% casualty rates during the Battle of Fallujah if you include both KIA and WIA, or also known as killed in action and wounded in action. I had many staff NCOs that were actually veterans of the Battle of Fallujah, and I do not envy them one bit, and that includes from my own personal experience, which I can say is not much better. And then, on top of that, Panama. So, Panama was okay, there is some controversy regarding Panama. Specifically, Panama, the president of Panama was actually a CIA agent that stopped following CIA orders and then became a threat to national security, so we actually went to overthrow him. And now, is that controversial in and of itself? Yes, but also the nature of modern warfare has been somewhat controversial since the end of World War II. And you see that with a lot of things. And that's unfortunately just kind of how war has progressed over the last 80 years. You can say, is the invasion of Iraq justified? Well, yes and no. W&Ds, probably not. The gassing of Kurdish people, yes. Harboring of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations and insurgencies, yes. Training of terror organizations by Iranian-backed militias inside of Iraq, yes. Islamic State following that in 2016 and onward, yeah. You could also, and then regarding your shock and awe. Shock and awe was very effective, and also shock and awe also hit the Ba'ath headquarters. It hit many different things, power stations, grids, but mostly what that was targeting command and control infrastructure. What you say is they hit power grids, and the thing about that is that those power grids were actually all located in or around military objectives. Specifically, they were powering command and control centers for especially the Iraqi Air Force and Iraqi air defense systems, which is why the Iraqi air defense systems actually went down and had a result to old-fashioned flak anti-air style. And also the destruction of the radar stations and anti-air batteries, specifically SAM battery sites that they had, and early detection radar stations, and also just their air bases. Air bases all across Iraq during both wars, and in Kuwait. If you ever been to Al Jaber or Kuwait, you can still see the absolutely demolished bunkers where we dropped 2,000-pound bunker busters through the center of them and blew these massive holes through them. They're really cool to go inside. But that is my answers to your comments there. People talk about conflicts such as Syria and whatnot. They bring up these things, and a lot of them don't realize that I was there. I spent almost a year in Iraq and Syria and other Middle Eastern countries fighting the Islamic State. So I do have at least a limited knowledge of what I am talking about, especially when it comes to the Conoco gas and oil fields. They are along the middle Euphrates River Valley, which when we're in Syria, when we get on later in the news, I will actually talk to you about a little bit. But anyway, that is a war crime to be eluding anybody. And at Bakhmut, we see that Polish tanks have actually seemed to arrive on scene. So Poland actually provided a lot of T-Series tanks with promises that they would be getting replacements from other NATO partners. The T-Series tanks means T-64s, T-72s, mostly T-72s. That's basically the most heavily produced tank in history. Maybe behind the I'd say even ahead of the T-34. But we're actually starting to see that here, and I believe that these are actually T-72 tanks based on their body work here. Yes, they look like T-72s. And so we're actually seeing them hit the front lines, and this is going to provide additional armor. We're actually hearing that based on some, I wouldn't say that they're solid yet statistics, but Ukraine actually may be fielding more armored vehicles than Russia is currently, just because Russia has lost so many. But we've also seen them desperately trying to bring more equipment into this fight. And as we move over here by Alchevsk, which is over here in the Luhansk region behind the lines, yesterday we saw Sunday we saw Russian helicopters flying low along here. And they seem to have noticed that they were filmed and people were kind of in awe. Well, today onlookers were given a show because a Russian K-52 pilot attempted to show off his low-level flying skills, but he didn't do so well. He doesn't crash, but He does everything but sing. So let's take a look.
Колямбусы, блядь! Ебать умыл!
Might I please remind everyone that there is a war going on? And these things get shot down all of the time. For as few K-52s that as Russia has, they've lost a pretty good amount of them, and this guy is being an idiot with it. So if it wasn't for the fact that Russia has probably a lack of trained pilots right now, I'd say this guy probably would get grounded by his command should it ever come out. But they probably will just, probably send him on a mission he's likely not to come back from, if I know the Russians. Once again, we see more incendiary weapons usage. So, once again, war crimes. That's kind of the theme of tonight. There, especially in Ukraine, is war crimes and the documentation to go behind it. We've talked about this before. And I'm going to show you this is the usage of incendiary munitions, some here in the Donbass. So let's take a look.
Нихуя себе, блядь!
Now, to the untrained eye, one would say, oh, those are just flares. No. Flare rounds actually burn as like a whole, it's just one piece. These are incendiary munitions. Specifically, they are being designed. They have airburst over an area, and then that rains down onto the area. Each little burning, like orange, yellow, white kind of bit is a piece of burning metal that is slowly falling through the sky, burning at thousands of degrees. It will not stop burning for a very, very long time, if ever. You cannot put them out, and that is what's causing this immense amount of smoke that you're seeing. This is possibly white phosphorus. That could be one. It could also be thermite. There's a lot of different types of incendiary munitions out there. But usually with white phosphorus, it's going to give off a very thick white smoke because white phosphorus is actually used for screening troops. Now, once again, those aren't used in an airburst fashion. Those are used for, they actually hit the ground and detonate all over the place. But as we can see here, there's a very thick white smoke coming out of the distance, and we have a very hot pieces of very plainly and openly incendiary munitions being used, much like we saw at the Azovstal at the end of the Battle of Mariupol. Is this a war crime? Once again, yes. Rule number 85, Volume 2, Chapter 30, Section B of the Customary International Humanitarian Law. The anti-personnel use of incendiary weapons is prohibited unless it is not feasible to use a less harmful weapon to render a person hors de combat. Hors de combat meaning combat ineffective or no longer a combatant. AKA, they are so severely wounded they can no longer be a combatant. AKA, you cannot use this against people. You can use this against things such as ammo depots, fuel depots, that kind of stuff. But it is a war crime. In fact, there are currently U.S. service members serving time in Fort Leavenworth who used a tactic called a shake and bake against terrorists and insurgent forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were caught. And they are serving life imprisonment for committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. This also breaks the Geneva Convention, specifically Protocol 3, Article 2, Parts 1 through 4. And this is protecting civilian populations from the use of incendiary weaponry. So you cannot use incendiary weaponry within civilian concentrations under any circumstances, whether it's airdropped, fired by artillery, doesn't matter. You cannot use incendiary weaponry against highly concentrated civilian populations, such as when they were used in Mariupol or over any city. Popasna is where we heavily reported on it first, over Mariupol, over whatever this poor village is, because we can obviously, these are not combatants, these are civilians. I just put it over in this area. This does not mean this is exact location. It's somewhere along this front lines, but it's a war crime, so you can't do it. Is targeting an entrenched unit considered part of that? Yes. Anti-personnel use, meaning if they are in, if it's a combatant, okay, and meaning it's an infantryman, and you are trying to burn them alive, you cannot do that. That is not permitted by the Geneva Convention, or by the International Customary Humanitarian Law. Now, where it is okay, once again, is using it against things such as fuel depots and ammo depots, because of course that's going to have combatants there, and unfortunately that isn't the objective, but that is unfortunately the result of using it on a military objective. Is unfortunately some people are casualties. However, they are also believed to have also been killed by the explosion as instead of the resulting burning alive. Entrenched forces, there are other means and methods to actually engage entrenched forces that would be less lethal, and that includes using massive amounts of artillery, which we've already seen. That includes precision bombardments, precision munitions strikes. That includes actually going through and clearing them out. Heavy tank assaults. I mean, what Russia is really wanting to do, or said that they were really trying to do based on their doctrine, and have not really done very well thus far. Just because you're losing or you're having difficulties does not mean you just say, okay, let's just go, screw it, break the rules. This stuff is meant, I mean, war is inhumane enough as is. These rules and laws exist so that way it doesn't have to be any more inhumane. And that actually brings us down into Mariupol. And we have a couple of different things here. So, first off, we get these 24 hours after the fact, and these are both statements made over the last 2 days by Petro Adrashenko, who is the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. Now, the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol is in reference to the Ukrainian mayor of Mariupol, not the occupational mayor of Mariupol. There is a distinction. There are two mayors, and one of them is under the occupational government of Mariupol. One of them was the Ukrainian government of Mariupol up until Mariupol fell to the Russian forces. And on May the 29th, this is a quote, on May 29th, Russian occupiers deported 253 Ukrainian citizens, including 33 children, from Mariupol to a filtration camp in the village of Bezymyn in the Donetsk region. His second quote from today, on May the 30th, Russian occupation forces deported 320 Ukrainian citizens, including 32 children, from Mariupol to a filtration camp in the village of Bezymyn in the Donetsk region. The last report we had before doing today, they were saying that well over 1,000, I believe, citizens had been deported over the past week. Once again, a war crime. There is no active combat or safety or security concerns in Mariupol. The combat is over. Therefore, you cannot forcefully deport people from this area any longer. now you have to resort to providing aid and shelter for them where they are, as long as they do not want to leave. There's also humanitarian laws regarding people being able to freely move and leave out of occupied regions on their own accord. And this falls under rule number 129 under Volume 2, Chapter 38, Section A of the Customary International Humanitarian Law, the act of displacement. A, parties of international armed conflict, which is what this is, may not deport or forcibly transfer the civilian population of an occupied territory in whole or in part, unless the security of the civilians involved or imperative military reasons so demand. Meaning, if they had evacuated civilians prior to bombarding Mariupol into no longer existing except on a map, that's okay. You can do that. You're protecting the civilian lives. Doing it here, not so much. This also breaks the Fourth Geneva Convention once again under Part 3, Section 3, Article 49, page 185. So I will go down here. $185. Individual or mass forcible transfers, as well as the deportation of protected persons from occupied territory to the territory of the occupying power, or to that of another country, occupied or not, are prohibited regardless of their motive. Nevertheless, the occupying power may undertake total or partial evacuation of a given area if the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. Such evacuations may not involve the displacement of protected persons outside the bounds of the occupied territory, except when, for material reasons, it is impossible to avoid such displacement. Persons thus evacuated shall be transferred back to their homes as soon as the hostilities in the area in question have ceased. The area in question, hostilities ceased over a week ago. The occupying power undertaking such transfers or evacuations shall ensure to the greatest practicable extent that proper accommodation is provided to receive the protected persons, that the removals are effected in satisfactory conditions of hygiene, health, safety, nutrition, and the members of the same family are not separated. The protecting power shall be informed of any transfers and evacuations as soon as they have taken place. The occupying power shall not detain protected persons in an area particularly exposed to the dangers of the war unless the security of the population or imperative military reasons so demand. And the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population to the territory it occupies. Therefore, what does this all constitute? You can't just forcefully kick people out of their homes and forcefully deport people. Now, I have talked quite extensively regarding filtration camp systems and regarding their uses during the Chechen War. Both Russian media, which we aired here, and Ukraine have both talked about this filtration camp in Bezymene, which is in the Donetsk region. This is supposedly capable of holding up to 100,000 Ukrainian detainees, is what they would technically be. The filtration camp system has been known for during the First and Second Chechen Wars, or whether you're calling them the filtration camps or filtration points, depending on the official nomenclature of the Russian Federation, what they have so been called, are more or less similar to a concentration camp more than they are like an actual, like, we're going to go through and actually screen you kind of thing. They are where you are systematically beat, tortured, raped, summarily executed. You are deprived of food, water, sleep, hygiene, sanitation, you name it. They are absolutely terrible places. I have talked about this, and I have also talked about when they were tried under international courts, where people were arrested and tried and convicted of this. And I actually went and I've explained this before, but I haven't proven it here before. And so I went ahead and I did that. I actually pulled the original. So this is the case of Sergei Le Pen, which if you wish, you can go and look him up. He was originally arrested in 2002, I believe. And then he was officially convicted in 2005 for his role as as a special riot control police officer who oversaw one of the filtration camps and worked in a filtration camp during the Second Chechen War. And this is the official statement regarding that from 2005, specifically 31st of March 2005. This is actually coming from Amnesty International, which is where this is an official release from them. Amnesty International welcomes the conviction and sentencing of Sergei Le Pen, a member of the Special Federal Riot Police Unit, or OMON, from the Khati-Mansiksk region of the Russian Federation by the Oktyabrski District Court of Grozny in the Chechen Republic. For the first time, a member of the Russian Federal Forces has stood trial in Chechnya itself for human rights violations against civilian population. Sergei Le Pen had been involved in the torture and disappearance of 26-year-old Zelimkhan Murdulov, who was detained on the 2nd of January 2001 in Grozny. The court on the 29th of March 2005 found Sergei Le Pen guilty of intentional infliction of serious harm to health under aggravated circumstances, Article 111, Part 3 of the Russian Criminal Code, exceeding official authority by aggravating circumstances, Article 286, Part 3, and forgery by an official, Article 292. He was sentenced to 11 years imprisonment with a strict regimen in a strict regimen prison colony. Under the release, he will be banned from the working for agencies under the Ministry of Internal Affairs for 3 years. In addition, the court has special ruling of the head of the Oman and reported criticizing the conduct of the Oman and serving in Chechnya in broader terms. So he is taken to pretrial detention in 2002. And what this is, he was actually ended up being executed. For those that don't know, he got the electric chair. Throughout the armed conflict in the Chechen Republic, Amnesty International has been concerned about the climate of impunity prevailing there and has called on Russian authorities to bring justice to perpetrators of human rights violations. However, very few effective measures have been taken. Only very few cases of disappearances, torture, and ill-treatment and extrajudicial execution have reached the courts. Many Chechen civilians have decided to turn to the European Court of Human Rights as the Russian judicial system has failed to show any real commitment to the punishment of those who commit human rights violations in the North Caucasus. While the ruling is of great importance not only for the family of Zelimkhan Murdulov, but also the people of the Chechen Republic who have been subjected to human rights violations and war crimes, much more needs to be done. Russian and Chechen officials give about 2,000 as the official figure for disappearances since late 1999, and the unofficial estimates are as high as 5,000 disappeared. So what these are regarding so Sergei was actually part of the filtration checkpoint system. That's actually how I found out about him, was looking at the filtration checkpoint system. I never heard of him up until this point. So he was also tried and convicted under the European Court of Human Rights. So if you would like to know more, you can go and look up Sergei Le Pen. And we also got more footage of the mass graves regarding Mariupol today. Now, these mass graves, there have been at least 3 identified via Maxar satellite footage. And today we actually have drone footage of one of those grave sites. So let's go ahead and take a look. And you're going to see this is even... I want to kind of put in perspective. Think about what you saw in Bucha, Hostomel, and Irpin, and then take a look at this. So this is one of the grave sites for Mariupol. These are all lines of mass graves. Just a straight dug trench. And this is one of 3 sites that we know of. The loss of civilian life in Mariupol is almost inconceivable to any standard. And with that, we actually move on to the port of Mariupol, where we see that Russian ships are actually taking containers. This is something that I had actually hypothesized, and many hypothesized, when a Russian container ship showed up empty to the port of Mariupol. And yet, here it is. This newly arrived container ship is now taking on new containers. Let's take a look. So, while the focus is on this ship, I want you to look at this one. This is the container ship, and this arrived in port completely empty. And we aired that when it arrived in port. This was completely empty. You can see where they have stacked container ships on the deck of this ship. So, this means that they are taking containers from Mariupol, and this ship is likely to be destined back for Russia. Once again, pillaging is illegal by international law and the Geneva Convention. This does not just include individual troops. This includes at the state level. And when you're talking about this large of an operation, I mean, how much coordination must there be between a Russian civilian container ship and the vast amounts of Russian patrols ongoing there? I mean, how many ships have been sunk within the Black Sea? And I'm not just talking Russian ships, but I'm also talking about international as well. You know, of several different ships which have actually been fired upon, including inside of the port of Mariupol. Now, Mariupol, its main export is steel, as you can tell by the two giant things of steelworks here, and the fact that there's a big focus on the Azovstal for quite some time. But Mariupol's biggest export is steel, and you need steel to build more vehicles. And because of the sanctions, Russia really isn't getting it right now. So this is a major resource that they need to recover as much of as they can in order to put that back into their military-industrial complex and then continue to fuel the war effort and try and at least replace some of the massive amount of lost equipment they have. And that actually brings us over here into the Kherson region. And over here, we actually hear that Ukraine has renewed their counteroffensive near Kherson, and we're seeing some very immediate results. So the Ukrainian forces started this renewed counteroffensive. They had a major one going on. It was very successful early on during the war. It was really the first major counteroffensive we actually ever heard of during the war, and it really just kept rolling. And while there has been heavy fighting, especially on the southwestern port of the Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblast, they really lost a lot of steam. They took some casualties. I mean, you got to keep the momentum going, and they just weren't able to, especially as the battle in the Donbass really ramped up. Now it seems they really have, and they've made some rather significant gains since then. So we actually have some footage regarding this new counteroffensive. And the first thing is here, where they're talking about the push for Ukrainian forces further into this region. We also can see it here in this actual footage coming out of the front lines. So, there you go. And on top of that, today, Mykolaiv was reported liberated according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Mykolaiv is right next to Novokakova, which is one of the two main bridges going into Crimea. So it looks like they have effectively split the Russian resistance within this region, and now Russian forces either have to withdraw closer back to Kherson, or they have to withdraw across this bridge over Novokakova. Now, we talked about very much earlier, about a month ago, where both of these bridges are expected to be rigged to blow, meaning they are mined and they are ready to be detonated behind retreating Russian forces. We also saw Russian forces pulling their aircraft away from the Kherson airport and actually further behind the lines over by Cheblinka. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now, and with this much of a gain, it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes from here, or if Russian forces are able to push Ukrainian troops back out and reopen that disconnect, or if they are now, at this point, effectively split in two, and they now have to really conduct a tactical withdrawal out of at least this northern section. And finally, for the last bit of news coming out of Ukraine, Russian forces reinforced Snake Island. Now, Snake Island was heavily bombarded by Ukrainian troops. The Ukrainian Air Force conducted bombing strikes, which actually, the Russian media actually used the Ukrainian drone footage of Ukrainian Air Force strikes on this as their own. And we actually brought that up here, where we showed that. And then, but they did end up reinforcing the island with more anti-air emplacements, and we can actually see some of that here. So this is coming from the 28th. These are images from the 28th. We can see additional batteries marked here on the map for us. So very interesting, very cool to see stuff coming from the Maxar satellite footage. And here's that image without the additions to it. But we did see ships going towards Snake Island prior to this via satellite footage that we could not confirm independently. But this is pretty conclusive evidence regarding the reinforcement, which is in line with what we were seeing. Blowing up a dam not a crime? Actually, that's a very tough one, and technically it's not. So it's not because a dam is technically a military target. Is it the right thing to do? Not really, but is it considered a military target? Yes, it's a major military industrial target. That's why you're never going to hear me say, oh, they hit a factory, that's a war crime. No, especially when I was talking about the Azovstal. The fact that they're bombarding the Azovstal, as horrifying as it wasn't the issue when there was concerns that they may have used a gas on the location, which is still unconfirmed and likely will never be confirmed. But even more importantly, the use of, say, things like incendiary munitions, that's where the problems start to kick in. So there is two distinctions that I will make here. There will be times where I will say that's a war crime, and when I do that, I obviously will back that up, but there are other times where it's just horrifying. Well, actually, the issue is that neither of these are actually dams. Both of these are not dams, they are bridges, so it's not holding back any water in these regions. And also, Russia has blown some of these dams already, and so a lot of this water is drained out. Keep in mind, Google My Maps, which is what I'm using, is not up to date when it comes to satellite footage. But a lot of these dams are actually, once Russian forces came in and took control, they were actually blown because these dams were blocking off water going into Crimea. So that was one of their military objectives in this region when they initially took it. And now we're seeing where they're going to be withdrawing and they're going to be blowing bridges behind them to prevent Ukrainian forces from further advancement, which we don't know if they will advance. We don't quite understand whether the Ukrainian forces are going to continue and take their pre-2014 border back, which would include Crimea and would also include all of the Luhansk and the Donetsk region, or if they're going to go back to their pre-February border, which would put them, just past, just up here over Crimea, and also, kind of holding steady here along these lines. We don't know what they're willing to declare as the victory or how far that's going to go, and that's still honestly probably up to debate too, depending on the support that Ukraine gets from the international community and depending on how the circumstances in some of these more major pitched battles is going to be occurring. Right now, SEVERODONETSK, while it seems like it's bad, that actually may be them pushing so deep into SEVERODONETSK may actually be because of a tactical withdrawal, because they are partially encircled right now, and it's not exactly where you want to be. So that could change at any moment, and a lot of this, as I will always maintain, is a very fluid situation. This stuff is changing minute by minute and second by second, and I'm giving a daily review. So what I could be saying now could already be inaccurate information. Okay, so is Ukraine going to get Ukraine is going to get partitioned and the Donbass is going to be Russian? Probably not. And the reason being is a war of attrition. Ukrainian forces are getting very well supplied by a vast number of countries. Russia is essentially fighting this war in and by itself. And Russia is not going to outproduce, which really, when you're talking about a large-scale war, it's a war of economies. Russia is not going to be able to outproduce 35 countries, 35 of the biggest economies and industrial countries in the world. You're not going to outproduce that. Also, as we've seen, Russian equipment, despite its upgrades, still is a lot of analog technology, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, because modern technology can have tendency to fail and glitch and whatever else, but it is inadequate for the operations they're conducting, especially when compared with their doctrine, which is not operating effectively within this region. That's why you're seeing such minor gains in a lot of areas along the Donbass. And while Severodonetsk may fall, it's probably not going to be that severe of a loss. While that may lose effectively the Luhansk region, it's going to put Ukrainian forces in a much better defensive position tactically, and it's going to make a lot better sense. It doesn't tactically make sense for Severodonetsk to hold because it risks losing a lot of Ukrainian troops. This is a war of attrition, and both sides are going to try to kill and destroy as much as they can of the enemy force. This is not a tactical. I take a city and you capitulate thing. It's not like that anymore. It's not like Germany taking Paris and France surrenders. This is Severodonetsk may fall, but we're going to kill a lot of Russians as we're withdrawing from here, and we're going to be in better lines, and we're going to be able to kill even more Russians. And eventually, Russia won't be able to put enough equipment. Right now, the actual firepower parity on the ground is roughly a 1-to-1, when really you want a 3-to-1 ratio when you're invading a country. So Russia also doesn't have any air superiority, which means that since they don't have anything but small pockets of localized air superiority, such as, say, over Mariupol, where it doesn't make sense for Ukrainian jets to be flying in the region anyway, means that they're losing expensive assets that they cannot replace. They're losing troops. They're losing manpower. The troops they're losing are the experienced ones, and eventually it doesn't matter how many tanks you take out, because you need troops for those tanks. You need ammunition for those tanks. You need fuel for those tanks. And if I blow up all of your fuel trucks and I blow up your ammo depots and I kill all your tank crews, It doesn't matter if you have a tank there because it's useless. It doesn't matter what you have in the fight. It's useless if you don't have someone that knows how to use it. And Russia, without doing a general mobilization, even if they did a general mobilization, that would take time. And they probably logistically couldn't support that many people as an influx of forces. We already see this with troops being supplied with older equipment, including the Mosin-Nagant and the Maxim machine guns that they're essentially pulling out of museums. And still in working condition, but they're museum pieces nonetheless. The Maxim machine gun was used during World War I. The Mosin-Nagant has been used since the late 1800s. While it's effective and it's still a weapon, is it a weapon for the modern battlefield? No, not really. And while that is a lot of rear echelon of troops, the more that they lose that valuable equipment that's for the frontline troops, the more they're going to have to fall back. We see this as Russia has gone from their T-80s and T-90s to T-72s, which makes up the majority of their armored force, and it was really T-72 B3s and BVMs. Now you're seeing T-72s with just a reactive armor, but no upgrades to them initially, which means they're pulling their storage T-72s. Now we've also seen T-64s. T-64s, you can tell by the stamped road wheels on them instead of the milled ones. And we've seen a limited number of those, but Russia also didn't produce nearly the same number of T-64s as they did the T-72. But they did produce a lot of T-62s prior to the T-64, which had a short run. So we've seen a lot of T-62s coming into the country now. And that shows the digression and really the issue of the losses that Russia is facing, because look at how far back you have to go. If you go any further back, you're looking, the next model that they would have to go to is the T-55 and T-54, and most of those were destroyed in the first Gulf War and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, because those were really the only countries left using them, and even the Iraqi army was using T-72s. So that's really puts into perspective where Russian losses are at. You can see the same with BTRs, because you're seeing BTR 80s becoming BTR 70s. We haven't seen any BTR 60s yet, though. The BMPs, we're seeing a lot less BMP 2s and 3s, and we're seeing a lot more BMP 1s, which are much older in design, but they're still widely used, but they're much older in design. Same thing with BMDs, which are even lighter for the VDV. They're pair-drop versions of those armored vehicles. A lot of BMD 1s, a lot less BMD 2 through 4. So it's a war of attrition, and Russia isn't winning the war of attrition. Ukraine's getting supplied every day and becoming stronger every day. Russia is getting weaker. I would no longer say, at the beginning of this war, I held a very firm statement that Russia was a military power, was a world power. But I no longer believe in that statement, because Russia, aside from a nuclear arsenal, cannot execute military operations even in a limited scope. So that's my personal opinion. But with that, that's actually going to wrap up all of Ukraine, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the international news. And there is still some to deal with the ongoing war. So the first thing that we have is actually over here. This is actually the first thing I found today. And this is because someone identified a helicopter base near Veliki. So Russian media actually released a video of them conducting helicopter operations. Nothing crazy, another propaganda video. We can take a look here and take a look at this. Of course, you have the Victory Day stripe here, but let's take a look. So that's all we really need to know is that they made this video. And the wonderful internet went back and they actually found Maxar satellite images from May the 23rd. And they geolocated it. So this is that video that you can see right here. And that is the airbase. And that is from the Sentinel-2 site and Maxar satellite footage from May the 23rd. They actually geolocated it. So you can actually pull this up here. So I have it right here in your Velikni. But I'm going to go ahead and put in this coordinates. And there it is. Right there. That it's in this field. It is now... This field is now considered a Russian field command for helicopters. So, pretty cool. Pretty cool indeed. That the internet is very powerful. But that is currently what's going on. As we jump up into Moscow, we have a couple of different developments, and the first one's rather comedic. Patriotic breast implants are now available in Moscow. So this this plastic surgeon is Yevgeny. So once again, I'm sorry for pronunciation. Yevgeny Dobrykin, and he's promoting his new patriotic breast implants called Rosgrud, which literally translates to Russian breasts. So let's take a look at this advertisement. And we have indeed had this independently translated for you by our in-house translator. So this is correct.
Грудных имплантов Росгрудь. Конечно же, это все тот же имплант, наполненный силиконом, но только посмотрите на покрытие этих эксклюзивных моделей. В линейке представлены два варианта стилизации: российский триколор и классический армейский камуфляж. Настоящие патриотки смогут выбрать ту модель, которая будет ближе им к сердцу в прямом и переносном смысле. Стильное решение для тех, кто любит родину и хочет иметь что-то больше, чем просто наклейка на машине или татуировка на плече. Кроме того, это экспериментальная модель имплантов, чье уникальное покрытие абсолютно безопасно и успешно прошло все необходимые испытания.
Я хочу быть самой красивой и самой модной, обладать чем-то по-настоящему эксклюзивным. И импланты Росгрудь как раз то, что мне нужно. Я не могу всегда носить с собой флаг, иногда даже паспорт положить некуда, а Росгрудь позволит мне чувствовать себя патриоткой, даже если на мне нет одежды. Это фантастическое ощущение, когда флаг твоей страны у тебя буквально под сердцем. У меня импланты с триколором, а моя подруга сейчас готовится поставить себе с камуфляжем. Сила не только в правде, но и в красоте.
There you go. I have a hard time trying to understand the Russian ideologies during this, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I've talked about a lot of different things regarding this. I mean, we've watched media. I actually follow some Russian media. I watched the Kremlin website. I watched several embassies. I watch all sorts of things. And I don't quite understand why. I mean, marketing 10 out of 10 if you're in Russia. I mean, I have no idea why this is the kind of marketing you would go for, but so anyway, there you go. That's what's currently going on in Moscow with that surgeon. We also found his Instagram, but we're not gonna release people's personal information here. And also, in much more serious news, though, after that little bit of comedic relief for you, a Putin critic may get an additional 15 years in prison. This is Alexei Navalny. And Alexei Navalny is the main political opponent for Putin. And he's currently serving a prison term for suspected falsified claims of embezzlement and contempt of court. And his sentence was actually extended for an additional 9 years just this year over these. On top of that, in 2020, he survived what is suspected to be a poisoning by FSB agents after once he was flown to Berlin from, I believe it was the United Kingdom, that they actually found what's called a Novichok nerve agent inside of his system, inside his body. That was the toxin that was killing him, and they did end up saving his life. He did go back to Russia and conduct some large-scale protests, and there he was arrested, and he was tried under these charges. He was been in prison for now, I believe, up to 11 years at this point, and he may get an additional 15 years under the guise of creating an extremist community because of his political beliefs. He is an opponent for corruption within the Russian government, and he does have a media team, and his lawyers do post relatively regularly on it. The Communist Party is the main political opponent to Putin. No. I do not believe that whatsoever. The main political opponent as an individual is Alexei Navalny. As an individual, he is the, if you want to talk about someone who's a major critic, he is, and those that do not support the Putin regime really follow Alexei Navalny. His ideologies ring true for a lot of Russians that don't believe in Putin's administration. And he's in prison, so he's kind of almost been he's been idolized to an extent as well, which definitely helps his proceedings. But this is actually Alexei Navalny's Twitter account. Alexei Navalny, his lawyers, he does get messages to his lawyers. He has been beat. He has reportedly been beat and tortured and starved and all interrogated and all sorts of things. But he is a major Putin critic, and enough that they may want him dead. But he's such a out there figure that at this point they really can't kill him. I would say is probably the issue for them. But when it comes to the Communist Party, the reason I say the Communist Party is not the biggest critic of Putin, is not the main opponent of Putin, is because Putin was very successful. In fact, Putin said that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. He has said it multiple times. When you say something like that, that automatically means that communism is not your biggest opponent, and we see that here. He was very successful as a KGB agent under the Soviet Union. He was not a spy like a lot of people think he was. He was not a spy. He was actually in charge of overseeing a lot of political entities inside of East Germany. That was actually his position. He was a KGB officer. He was not a spy, and that's a distinction. So that's kind of what's going on. So right now, the Communist Party actually came from the Far East, and we actually aired that here, where they were talking about being against the war in Ukraine, and they were tried to be shut up by the rest of the Duma. Did not work. They just kept talking. So there is a little bit of a disconnect currently with the Communist Party and Putin. But Putin has really put this into a kind of an authoritarian position now as a country, and not really nobody's going to be able to say anything to change his mind. And there are former foreign ministers and dignitaries that served under Putin at other times that have suggested that the Russian people or his own government will probably kill him before they tell him that he's wrong. So with that, we're going to go ahead. Okay, he did say that, and so I'm going to ignore the rest of that. We have video evidence of him saying he said it at a Victory Day parade. I'm not going to have a debate with that. I'm sorry, Guillermo. And also, the EU announced additional sanctions. This is the sixth round of sanctions today against the Russian Federation. And so far, what is being reported is they're disconnecting the Spur Bank from SWIFT. They're blocking the broadcast of 3 Russian state broadcasters within the European Union, and they're expanding the list of Russian sanctions persons responsible for possible war crimes. So that is currently the aspects. There's also talks that they are going to drastically reduce the reliance on Russian oil and gas, and currently there's still debate ongoing about this, and unfortunately that is going to still take some time to kind of sort through. And that actually drops us down here into the Middle East, where we see that as we go towards the Middle East here in Istanbul, formerly known as Constantinople, a man set himself on fire in Istanbul near a major tourist attraction, and they did end up putting him out. The man did survive, but he hasn't stated his motive for this. And so we have a photo here of them putting him out. But yeah, we just don't know why he did this. Now, this is a form of protest that we have seen, globally before, but that's especially in the Middle East. But yeah, usually they are pretty obvious about what their statement is regarding that. As we move into Armenia, we can see here in Yerevan that the protests continue. The opposition party attempted to block a third building of the government. And there were clashes with police. More people were injured. And they are still calling for essentially the leader of their government's resignation. But it still has not come about, and they've attempted to break into additional government buildings. And so we can take a look at that here. And that brings us further down south, and we actually get into Syria. And oh boy, are there a couple of developments in Syria. So the first thing is that, first of all, over Hasaka, we are actually, which is over here where my cursor is, Al-Hasaka, and also over Aleppo, we're seeing increased amounts of Russian air activity. This includes fighter aircraft, multi-role aircraft, and a lot of helicopters being flown over the area. The Russian Federation is still conducting military operations inside of Syria, and we'll actually get to a little bit more of those. And right now, they're currently in talks with the president of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, who is talking with Vladimir Putin about the buffer zone in northern Syria because he's wanting to expand it. And so that means a further incursion into the country of Syria. However, that puts him at odds with the Assad regime, which is what Russia is backing here. And also, they're doing this because of the Kurds, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But the previously reached agreements on the withdrawal of Kurdish forces inland, but it didn't work. And there's pretty good reason for that. And take a look at some of these Russian aircraft flying around.
قرية وحشية جندي وحشية ولا فرن هليكوبتر شش هليكوبترن ولا فرن هليكوبتر سرهرم شهبانه بريخو لبر ملي عزاز عفرين طيبت خد انفار ري انفار ملي عزاز وعفرين ضايع.
So rather significant air activity coming from the Russian side. And as we pop up here up north, we can see that the Syrian army is strengthening near the border. So the Syrian army has a semi-arrangement with the Kurdish forces in response to Turkey. Turkey has put in a 30-kilometer wide border considered a buffer zone. They're looking to expand this, but that would be a further incursion into Syria, and neither group wants that. While the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and Assad may not get along, the best thing to unite a people is a common enemy, and Turkey is the common enemy. So the Syrian army is putting additional forces up by the border with Turkey, especially near Tel Rifat, and this is them in anticipation of this. Nuri Mahmoud, who's the spokesperson of the Kurdish militia, said that the PKK considers the offensive of the Turkish army a very real threat, and Turkey has received permission from the operation from NATO countries. So this means that U.S. forces are probably not in the affected zones of this, and other coalition partners. So this is why they're able to give the go-ahead, because they already withdrew from the majority of these areas previously back in 2019 and 2020. So they don't see this as the will of the government in Damascus. They don't see this as the will of any Syrian people. And the Kurds are rather oppressed, which I'm getting ready to go into. But we can see the Syrian forces moving up there, actually into these border regions. So they're ready for a fight if it comes. And we can see as this is happening, Russian and Turkish forces are conducting joint patrols. So the Turkish military, together with their Russian counterparts in this part of Syria, are conducting military patrols along the border area, particularly near the city of Kobani is what they're calling it, which is actually Bad, if I can move it out of the way here, Bad Rajbana. We can actually take a look at that here. So they are conducting joint patrols. We do know that that is happening. And considering the tensions over the war in Ukraine, this is a very interesting step for the two countries to be taken. This may be taken out of necessity because they're both jointly operating in this region and they do not want a war to break out. But there's also been a lot of contention between Erdogan and Turkey and other NATO allies. So that could also be an issue. And Turkish forces conducted a drone strike on a PKK commander near Komishli. Once again, I'm sorry for my pronunciation. I do not pronounce these very well. And so basically they used a UAV, destroyed a car with a PKK commander and 4 other members of the PKK, all of which were killed in action. And that was ended up reported by the pro-Turkish SNA militants. So they were willing. So there are pro-Turkish forces in this area. They are not actual Turkish troops. They're militias that are behind Turkey, and they're willing to assist, which we already knew that they would. And there is the strike itself, or at least the immediate aftermath, as that vehicle is still burning. That poor Toyota Hilux and the commanders inside. So here is what is going on in Syria. And so there are multiple groups there's like 40 factions fighting in Syria. So this is extremely broken down, oversimplified beyond all belief. But really, you can break it down into just a couple of factions, and all of them have some factions working with each other. You have the Russian Federation, you have the Assad regime, which are allies. You have Turkey and all of their militias, and also a bunch of militias with the Assad regime. You have the YPJ and YPG, the PKK, the YPK, and the SDF as a whole, which is a group of, there's like 6 different groups, both Arab and Kurd, inside the SDF. And then you have coalition forces, which include the United States, Poland's, there's a whole, the French, the Brits, there's a whole group of them. And then you have the Islamic State, which is everywhere. And then occasionally you have Israel, who just kind of comes in and bombs Damascus and flies home. So that is really the overall breakdown of how Syria operates. The main line between these two groups is this river. This is the Euphrates River. It is called, this part of the Euphrates River is called the Merv, or the Middle Euphrates River Valley. The Conoco area, this is the general area where my cursor is. I'm not going to give specific areas, except that have already been released, and that is the Deir Azur province, then the Conoco oil fields, which are right here, north of like Kasham and all these areas, Al Sawar, Spokane, those kind of areas. Those are all, that is where coalition forces are known to be located, and also in this general area as a whole, there's a lot of different sites. Back in 2018, when I was in Syria, the Wagner Group and also the pro-Assad regime militias conducted an attack on one of our unit's locations in this general vicinity, and we bombed them for an extensive amount of time. Then in 2020 and in 2019, Turkey conducted the incursion. The reason Turkey is conducting the incursion is because Turkey really doesn't like the Kurds. You have Ottoman Turks, which are really the Turks as a whole, and then you have Kurds, who Kurds have really no own country of their own. You have like Kurdistan, you have Syrian Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, which is really centered around the Dahak region, just north of Mosul and Erbil. But they're all in this region. You have a couple of different parts of the Kurds, but they're all oppressed. You have the PKK, which is a Marxist group, communist Kurds, essentially, as someone in the chat put it. And then you also have the YPG, YPJ, and the YPK, which is the overarching group. And they are democratic Kurds. So they all work together because they are the same ethnicity and they're all equally oppressed. But what Turkey sees the Kurds as is they see them all as terrorists. Really, they just hate the whole ethnicity of Kurds. That's just kind of their thing. I hate to put it that way, but it's honestly the truth. And the only thing that was really keeping Turkey from doing that was the United States. But two NATO allies fighting each other possibly is not a good thing for international relations. So the U.S. was forced to pull out. So that is basically what's going on in Turkey. This is also why Turkey is possibly going to veto Finland and Sweden joining NATO, because Finland and Sweden support Kurdish SDF forces inside of Syria, who Turkey is the only country in the world that actually sees them as a terrorist organization. And that is the situation inside of Syria as a whole, and why it's a giant jumbled mess, because everyone is fighting ISIS and each other at the same time. So it's a very jumbled mess. It's a very bad situation, and it's really tragic. If you've ever had a chance to look into it or experience it, for those that may have been there, you know what I'm talking about. But it's a very tragic situation, especially for the civilian population, because it's really depressing to think about and look back on. But from there, we're going to jump into Iraq, which is where we see a rocket attack on Al Asad Air Base. Al Asad Air Base is actually one of the largest facilities for coalition forces inside the country of Iraq. It was the target of when Iran fired missiles into Iraq. It was one of the major targets there, as well as Erbil, which also has a U.S. military installation up there, which is also up by like Mosul in that area. But Al Asad Air Base is right here, is a massive air base. It's an Iraqi air base that has contingents there for U.S. military forces. They received rocket attacks from a group that was, they say it's a previously unknown formation. It was kind of known. It's a Shiite group called the Harakat al-Nujaba, which is a, how do I put this? It would be falling under one of the probably Iranian-backed militias, much like Kataib Hezbollah. And that is just kind of a factor that we see, because those are generally the people who are using this. And we can see that they are basically just putting a bunch of Katyusha rockets inside of these metal poles, and they light them. And they mount these on the back of trucks. You can see this one is here with a bunch of cinder blocks. It doesn't matter, it all works the same, but this allows them to light them, leave, they fire, And by the time anyone, kind of calculates back to where this came from, they go there, they find it, there's no one around to arrest or attack or anything. So that's kind of how these groups fight. They do not fight. I mean, they're insurgents. They don't just come out and fight because they would lose. So that's how they kind of operate. You saw the same thing when they were hitting the Baghdad embassy for like a month straight back in 2020 with rockets. That was also not a very fun time. Very annoying, to say the least. And up here in Tehran, which is here in Iran, it's the capital of Iran, we can see that protesters are being really hunted down in Iran. And there's a lot of protesters that are currently angry over economic issues. Iran is heavily sanctioned, not nearly as heavily as Russia, but they are heavily sanctioned, and they have been for quite some time. The ongoing war is even putting more issues with that, because now that's causing food prices to increase, so that's causing food insecurity. That's causing fuel issues throughout the region. There's a whole bunch of stuff currently going on, but Iran is rather brutally suppressing these protesters, as is in their nature. So you can actually see that here. Yep, that's not how we would probably handle things usually, but that is, well, Tehran's not known for its humanitarian efforts ever, so that's the thing. And then as we move further to the east, we see here in Islamabad that the ceasefire between Pakistan and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is the Talibani, it's the Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, sorry, the Talibani. But they extended the ceasefire because they're currently going through a bunch of negotiations to try and get a peace deal. So that's currently what's going on. They're kind of coming to a truce, and hopefully that's going to be the end of hostilities. And right now it's being mediated by the Afghani Taliban. So that's also in a hope to improve relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan for future cooperation. And just up here into the Jammu and Kashmir region, we can see that there are mass demonstrations regarding that. The government of Pakistan was accused by demonstrators of sponsoring militants who carry out terror attacks and murders in the region. We've seen India fighting this as they are going through, and they're engaging pro-Pakistani militant organizations. But this region is contested by both. It's claimed by both Pakistan and India. And as a result, it sits perpetually kind of jointly occupied by the two countries. And these are two nuclear countries that really do not like each other as is. So that is a major point of contention in the world, and is considered one of the most fragile peace agreements and peace accords in the world. Much like Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, though it's a very fragile peace there, it's a very fragile peace here, and the Jammu and Kashmir tests that every single day. Just like India will be hunting down pro-Pakistani militants, Pakistan and their forces in the region will also be hunting down pro-Indian militants, and they accuse each other all the time. So that's currently the situation in the Jammu and Kashmir, and we can see some of these demonstrations here. You can see the Indian flag being flown there. So that's kind of the situation in the Jammu and Kashmir. As we drop down here into Nepal, we have a follow-up. Bodies are currently being pulled from the site of the plane crash there in Nepal. So far, 14 bodies have been recovered. And this is from Nepalese Terra Airlines, which ended up crashing while en route to Jams. So, unfortunately, they did say that according to the official representative of the carrier, the plane crashed into a mountain and shattered into pieces within the radius of about 100 meters. So that is currently the situation there, and you can see that plane crash, and the current ongoing efforts to go through and try and look for survivors, but also a lot of, unfortunately, body recovery. With that, we continue on our march east here, and we can jump down here to Singapore, which has some rather interesting news. And that's because they're turning urine into beer. Singapore launched a beer made from recycled urine. 95% of the beer consists of new water, pure water obtained from recycling urine and sewage, and it has no taste and smell and is suitable for consumption. So this contains German malt, hops, and Norwegian yeast. So the manufacturer draws attention on the onset of water shortages in Singapore. Droughts are a common issue globally right now. We're seeing it in Iraq. We're seeing it in Africa, on the Horn of Africa specifically, and we're also going to see it here. And this is potable water. This is water that can be drank and is suitable for consumption. Unfortunately, a lot of pollutants, especially in developing countries, are just it's a little difficult right now. So, interesting development. I'm not sure I would drink it, but to each their own. As we jump up to China, we can see that China is getting ready to launch their newest aircraft carrier. And China has been very rapidly expanding their military-industrial complex. They're trying to become, they already are a world power, but they're trying to expand their influence, and part of that requires a stronger military. They've actually built the largest navy in the world now. They have surpassed the United States in that category. Now, their effectiveness of their ships is questionable, and that is up for some debate, firepower wise, but they are still building an additional aircraft carrier fleet. They have a lot of different smaller surface ships and vessels, but they're still working on the aircraft carriers. And we can take a look at that here. It's very near to completion. We can see all they really have left is their elevators to bring up from the hangar deck up to the flight deck for launching. But that's very interesting photos and images that we got going on here. This really tells you can see all of the ships that are getting built around it. I mean, they are turning out ships at some of these shipyards at really an astonishing rate. Now, how capable they are is questionable on a military standpoint, simply because we've never seen China really go to war with anyone to know, and we really don't want to, because their likely choice is Taiwan, Japan, or South Korea. So that's kind of and Taiwan being an emphasis. So that's kind of the situation in China right now, and we're still following the developments of their growing military. And as we jump over here to Japan, Panasonic released a brand new Toughbook, and this thing is $4,899 if you want one. Now, it's made from magnesium alloy. It will not be damaged from a fall of roughly 6 feet or 2 meters. The laptop is protected from dust, water penetration, works in extremely low and high temperatures. It has a secure wipe feature that will erase its contents from the drive in a couple of seconds. This thing is insane. Now, Toughbook is like military grade equipment. Like, we use these in war zones. That's like our laptops. But they are extremely expensive. And but they're very interesting to take a look at, and I'm sure someone will pay nearly $5,000 for one. So, but it will not be me. I will not be paying $5,000 for a Toughbook. The computer I have now is just fine. And as we backtrack a little bit, we're going to jump down here into Africa, and that's because 2 members of the Wagner group were reportedly killed in Uwam Pende area of the Central African Republic. So they were apparently killed in clashes with a militant group, and four Russian Wagner members were allegedly injured, and then 2 additional were killed. The incident reportedly occurred on May the 27th. So the Wagner group is a Russian mercenary group that is really an extension of the Russian armed forces. What makes them an extension is really their only purpose is to have plausible deniability. We've even seen them employed in Ukraine as active combatants alongside regular Russian forces. But their really only purpose is to have that plausible deniability. Now, the Russian embassy within the Central African Republic actually denied any information regarding the deaths of Russians and calling it the stuffing from the opposition. So, can we confirm it? No, but it wouldn't be the first time. I mean, like I said, when we were in Syria in 2018, we also had an international incident, and we killed and wounded like 300 of them. So, I mean, but that's what they're there for. You can't, sure, they're Russian people, but they're mercenaries, right? Like, they're paid to be there. They're not official Russian forces. None of that. But the reality so far, as what we can tell, is very different from what is being portrayed. We jump over here into the United States. There's a massive fire in Omaha, Nebraska. This massive fire actually broke out at a chemical plant just outside the city of Omaha. Those living nearby were initially encouraged to shelter in place, and those that could not evacuate were urged to stay inside with the windows closed. As of 7:45 a.m. on Tuesday, no civilian or firefighter injuries had been reported, but the crews were fighting hot spots within the fire, and the focus for day 2 will be putting out the hot spots in one building and investigating the cause of the fire. So, just a massive fire at a chemical plant. Now, this isn't unheard of. Chemical plants are generally, by nature, dangerous. So, take a look at this video. So as you can see, just from a distance, a rather massive fire there in Omaha, Nebraska. But I'm glad that there are no injuries being reported. So I hope that they do discover the cause of the fire. And hopefully that may identify something that may save future lives and so they can fix defects in possible defects in other locations. And finally, to wrap up the night after this very long stream, I'm sorry it's been so long, guys. There were a lot of questions and a lot of information inside of Ukraine. But we have an interesting one for you, and I'm actually going to zoom in here. So this is essentially a city of the dead. That's essentially what this is. In fact, it's called so. It's called the Saqqara Necropolis, and they find a huge amount of artifacts here. So they just unearthed a massive thing of artifacts, and it includes 250 complete mummies painted in wooden sarcophagi and over 100 bronze statues of ancient Egyptian gods. So this dates back all the way back to 2,500 years ago during Egypt's late period. And so this is the Cemetery of Ancient Animals, that temple complex within Saqqara. And so it's a very interesting place. And for those that are cat lovers, it's specifically dubbed Babustion, or Bubustion, a reference to the ancient Egyptian goddess Bast, or Bastet, who is worshipped there in the form of a cat. This is the first time that artifacts from the late period of Egypt have been found in Saqqara. Mostly this stuff is earlier, especially when you consider the steppe period of Dosir. And that steppe period, for example, was built in 2700 BC, so during Egypt's third dynasty. So there's a lot going on here, but this pyramid is possibly the oldest intact stone structure ever found, or the earliest complete stone structure ever found. But let's just take a look at some of these artifacts. I mean, that is a massive amount of mummies. Like, that's a massive amount. When's the last time you heard about this many mummies being found? When's the last time you heard about a mummy being found, period? I mean, that's just cool. You can see all of the cats. All of the cats. The Egyptians loved their cats. A lot of artwork, a lot of small artifacts. Keep in mind, these are things, I mean, when you're burying someone like this in ancient Egypt, these things are ceremonial. And I mean, considering how old they are, I mean, just look at the paint and the detail on these things. These things have been sealed for thousands of years. So their level of detail is amazing. Their preservation is amazing. I mean, you can see the paint on all of these sarcophagi. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens when they go through and they scan these, because they normally do scan them and they can see what's inside. They x-ray through and they can see the different layers of what's going on inside. Some of them have even been found and still have food in their stomachs and this, that, and the other, despite the embalming process. So, but we find this on Live Science, of course. Live Science has all sorts of cool stuff, so you guys should honestly go check them out. They're a really good source. They have a lot of cool stuff. So really, if you have any interests in like science or archaeology or anything, wonderful source. We find all sorts of stuff for the good news at the end of the day. But that is actually it. That is all of the news for the day. There was a lot over the last 48 hours, and I apologize once again for it being such an extremely long stream. But we want to cover everything, and we don't just want to miss everything. You know, we just want to miss stuff. When it comes to, I always want to try and put some comedic relief. So I know that some of this stuff is a little bit weird today, but there's a lot of bad stuff going on. There's a lot. I mean, how much should I talk about war crimes today in depth? I mean, that's not a good topic, but it's an important one. But we need to laugh too, and sometimes stuff just, it's funny and ridiculous. So I appreciate those that asked questions and had some interesting comments. But some comments that have been made sometimes aren't necessarily kind of what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to be super political in what we're trying to do here. We're trying to stay rather apolitical and unbiased, and when we have a bias, we clearly state it. So this is backing Ukraine, and the reason we back Ukraine is for the very reasons I showed you. Like, there is a reason why we say what we say, and when we are saying it's a war crime, there's evidence to prove that, as I bring up here time and time again. And I'm trying to get better at that, to show you and it kind of educate a little bit more than, say, a normal news channel would, and I hope that you find that stuff very knowledgeable. But there's a lot of terrible stuff going on in the world, and we can help. And you as the community are the most important piece to that puzzle. Please check out the description below, and please check out all of the different donation links, not just for the ones for Ukraine, but also everywhere else in the world. 90% of people in the Tigray region of Ethiopia require humanitarian assistance just to survive. Children in the Horn of Africa, specifically under the age of 5, are especially at risk for malnutrition and death because of the ongoing famines and droughts. And so please consider all of those factors. Please consider Southeast Asia as well, as they are still recovering, despite the fact they're coming out with beer made of urine. Obviously, that's because of a water shortage, as was stated in the article. So that's not a good thing as a whole. So please consider these types of things. Please consider these regions, not just Ukraine. While Ukraine is still important, though, do still take a look at them. And also, if you have any additional information, whether it's additional sources, or if you have, especially if you have different types of fundraiser links that you may have, or organizations that are currently raising money, please send them to a staff member on our Discord, whether that's myself or any of the other staff members that are listed. And then we will get that relayed. We will get that through the vetting process, and we will take a look at it and make sure everything is good. and then we will actually get that added both onto the donation link section on our Discord and also here on the channel for every stream. If you can't give a lot to these kind of things, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe, because it helps us reach more people. And the more people come here, they can get this international news. They can hopefully learn something from all of this. And they can also have a chance to make a meaningful impact on the world around us and the people that are personally affected by the very news that we talk about every single day. So I want to thank those that have already supported us, as well as the staff team. I only lend my voice. They are truly the ones that make this thing happen. So without further ado, my name is Paul from the New News. I hope that you guys have a wonderful night. And I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe and that they remain safe. If not, I hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. And we will hopefully see you guys back here tomorrow. So have a great night. I'll talk to you later. Bye.